Welcome to a 21-minute live event. It's been a little while since we put one of these together, and I'm super excited that joining me today is Warren, the famous Salesforce mentor, Walters954, and development practice lead at Victoriam Solutions, as we continue our quest to Salesforce responsibly. Warren, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks so much for having me on. Happy to be here. Wonderful topic. Everybody knows I'm super excited about it. So, thanks. I'm really excited to discuss this with everybody.
And this is a good one because for those that don't know, you and I have worked together in the past, and we've certainly shared some jokes between going to clicks versus code. And so I'm super excited to actually have you to have this discussion with. So just to get right going, right? Because we try to keep this within 21 minutes or so. The three questions we're going to answer today are: what is clicks versus code, and can clicks and code live in harmony? How can you tell if you're going too deep into code and declarative, and what can you do about it? And then what needs to be evaluated when you're considering switching from a convoluted implementation to like a more streamlined org? So let's jump right in. Warren, tell me, for those that are listening, what is clicks versus code?
Clicks versus code is really the difference in the tool set that you have using Salesforce. So on one hand, you have declarative configuration, things that you can do inside of Salesforce, let's say out of the box. And then on the other hand, you have things that you can do with development, actually writing code. This is Apex code, JavaScript, you name it. There's a ton of different frameworks out there, Visual Force, Aura. So it's knowing the differences of when to use clicks, which is the declarative side, and when to use code, which is the programmatic side of things.
And can I know you've done some work in the consulting world for a couple of years. Can clicks and code live in harmony? Have you seen some good examples, or maybe some bad examples? Like how can that go wrong?
Yeah, I think we can definitely see it live in harmony. There is a specific balance that needs to get covered there. It is really hard when you have a ton of different moving pieces inside of your org. You'll have a bunch of workflow rules, automation rules, process builders, flow that all work together inside of a specific org. And then you have code on top of that because process builders and all of the standard out of the box automations can only get you so far. So that's when you need to interact with code and start to use the advanced features that come from code. So can they live in harmony? Yes, it takes a really well thought out org, a well planned org, and everybody to be on the same page when they are building out the entire flow. Because if you just go in there willy nilly, some of your things are done in process builders. You have some of your code doing validation rules. It can get really overwhelming and things can start to fire off when you don't even know what's going on. You're updating records and maybe there's validation that's going off on the page. You look on the page validations and you're not seeing anything, the actual object validations. And from me knowing over the years doing consulting, well, if it's not a validation on the actual object, it's most likely in the code somewhere. But for less advanced or for people just coming into an org, you may not know that and you may just be completely confused. This may stop the users and the company from doing whatever they need to do. And it gets really complicated to be able to have harmony or balance between all the different features that we have in here.
So that's really interesting, and I can totally relate because several times I've seen situations, especially if you pick an old org. Old orgs are great examples because back then flows were nowhere near as powerful. Actually, if you look back 2-3 years ago, flows were nowhere near as powerful as what they are today. So today, declaratively, you can get away with much more than you could before. And if you're looking back to orgs that were from 2013, 2014, I mean, you'll run into potentially a ton of Apex because that was the only way you could get close to accomplishing what you needed done back in the day. And these companies have so much code, tangled, right? And in today's functions and possibilities, it's very tough to apply some of the new things. So any words that you can share on that? And I guess as a segue, right? Like if you start on something, how can you tell if you're going too deep into, into code or declarative, and what you can do about it?
It boils down to technical debt on both sides, because you can, for older orgs, you can see a lot of them with a bunch of triggers and just convoluted logic inside of their code that they had to do because it was an older org. And a lot of times, like you said, we're seeing it in older orgs, and I've been seeing it in like org migrations or org refreshes, where we'll have to come in and basically fix all of the technical debt and the legacy code that they have in there. And for us, we'll end up recommending new features like, oh, well, we can take this whole section of code here. It's locked in. Generally, you need a developer to do any type of updates to it. And let's just migrate it to flows or process builder, where any admin can go in and understand the logic and, actually make some updates. So you start to know when you're going too deep, when only, like, let's say the easiest way to know is if only one person understands it. If there's only one person that can go in there and make changes or make edits, and maybe you're the solo admin, which that makes sense, but if somebody else can't come in and pick up and understand what's going on in the org, you've definitely gone too deep on both sides of the spectrum. We've originally or mostly been focusing on the code side, but you can get too far on the declarative side as well when you have too many process builders just stacked on top of each other, and you don't know the order that they're firing or what the processes that are going on in any of the calculations or anything that you're doing. If you save a record and you don't fully understand what's going to happen, what fields are going to get updated for any given process that you're running, that's probably a red flag that something may need to change. You may need to reevaluate the structure that you're running here. And I know we're kind of talking in hypotheticals, but it can take a lot of time. And what you'll need to do is kind of step back and understand what is going on inside of the org. But I'm curious for you, how you kind of know, if you're going too deep, and what are some of the red flags that you've seen in the declarative versus the code side as well?
Yeah, so for the declarative side, there's definitely a lot that you can look into where if you're going too deep, because sometimes you'll have some ideas, especially as you become a more experienced declarative admin, where you'll have an idea of a capability of a flow or a process builder, and you have some decent understanding of, the sequence of events when you save something, and you're presented with a challenge, and you try to start chasing things down, but you suddenly have something that just like that it's going to stop you. Like, let's say you need a process builder, and as soon as a field gets updated, you're waiting for that field to get updated in order to do the next thing, and you want to do that next thing automatically. So like you could stack process builders one after the other, or you start kind of like putting a 0 hour delay on a process builder, right? So that way you can like let the first thing run first and then do the second. And this was, pre-flow considerations, but it's those kind of things. Like when you start seeing that you're pushing the declarative too far, like you should clearly know in the back of your head that you're trying to do things that declarative programming isn't there yet, right? And you're trying to cheat the system. I've seen some people do it successfully. I've seen some people not do it successfully, but at the end of the day, you'll spend a ton of time where at that point, I probably would have preferred, like knowing what I know now, I probably would have stopped and asked someone with development experience to say, how much time would it take for you to do this in code before I go down a rabbit hole? And it was really awesome to be able to build, in our line of work, we can easily build tons of connections in the Salesforce community. So, that you are a big proponent of the Salesforce Exchange Discord channel. And there's a lot of great places out there, to kind of help validate your thoughts before you go too deep in declarative, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And the term I've come to use recently, probably in the last couple of months, is the juice worth the squeeze? Because you can go down that rabbit hole for sure. You can spend tons of time building things out declaratively, but if a developer could come in and do it in, half the time or a quarter of the time, that's when you kind of need to step back and understand if this is something you need to go down, especially on the side of, I think there's one easy tell. If you're going to make an object for like one specific process to maybe like hold a value for another process builder or something like that, that's when you should kind of step back and say, well, maybe this should be in code. I don't need to just have some dormant object just sitting here to run values just for us to do this in Flow. It may be worth it, but a lot of times it's good to validate what you're trying to do at that specific point. Take a step back, phone a friend, get on the Discord, do whatever you can. You can message me. Do whatever you can to kind of validate what's going on in your mind and see if it's worth doing what you want declaratively versus programmatically.
Yeah, and I know some very old school, some very old school colleagues that we have in common, people that we've worked together with. They had the old school version of that they would even sit down with a notebook and kind of write down the entire idea. They would almost like write down the config, so that way they could visualize what they were doing before putting it into Salesforce to,
Mhm.
as visual through a visualization exercise, try to see if they would run into any issues. Um,
Yeah, and
so go
one thing
ahead.
I'll add is I know we're kind of beating up on the declarative side of things, but on the flip side of that, code and developers do the same exact extreme. On the other hand, they'll put literally everything in code. And I was probably, when I first started out, I wanted to do this because I'm a developer. I love writing code. This is what I want to do. So when I first started out, I was just writing everything in code. You name it, validation rules, SQL queries, whatever. I was just throwing it all in there. I can do it all, and you really can, but it's should you do it all? Because you're going to lock yourself in. You're going to be called for any little validation rule fix. And after I started to realize that, you start to know the combination of, hey, this could be declarative. Let's start using like custom metadata settings or giving the users or the admins some of the features to skip some of the processes and stuff like that, so that you're not just completely locked into code and your org has a ton of technical debt.
So let me ask you a question here, because I think this is a good one, and for anyone looking to take any certification exam, I think this is relevant. Correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding of this type of exam question is that whenever they prompt you what is the best tool to accomplish a certain scenario, the the best way to go about it is to do the lowest common denominator. So if they put a scenario that you can accomplish with a process builder, a flow, and code, and your fourth option is a workflow, but that's irrelevant. Your Salesforce wants you to select process builder, right? Is that still the norm with these cert questions?
Yeah. So you definitely want to use the lowest common denominator, the easiest thing, the thing that everybody could pick up the easiest. Because having to write it in code, that is not easy. There's a lot of considerations when you look at code. So this type of question, you're totally right. Workflows are kind of going out. I don't even think some new orgs have traditional workflows in them. Process builder and flow. Originally, I would say yes, let's go with process builder, and I think for the time being, it is going to be process builder as the correct answer. But eventually, we're going to start moving into maybe just throwing out process builder altogether and having flow as the correct answer for that, because we've seen how powerful flows are getting over. I think we're in winter 21 right now. Process builders, you're able to do record triggered updates. So that's a before save and an after save. If you haven't checked out flows recently, it is
Yeah.
a huge transformation over the past year for flows. And I think that's going to be the future. Definitely jump on it if you haven't learned it, because flows are getting a ton of new features and becoming really powerful.
Yeah, and Winter 21 actually came out today, at least in the org that I'm working on. And I can already see right away tons of new improvements. But you've known me long enough, and for those that are watching, I guess you guys wouldn't know, but I've never been a fan of process builders. I've quite despised process builders. So Warren, hearing that most people are kind of getting in line with, process builders will eventually go away, to me just is music to my ears, because it was just too much power uncontrolled for, for one inexperienced person to handle. So
Oh yeah.
I am very glad for that going. But kind of putting a bow on this then, talking about clicks not code, going too deep, when you're going from a coding perspective, then do you still apply that mindset of saying now, hey, like, can I do is there a lower common denominator? Like, as a developer, do you as an experienced developer, especially now, do you go back and do you use that as a leverage at all? Does that mindset that they try to teach us in the exams, does that actually ring true in real life for you?
For developers, there is a hierarchy or lowest common denominator of ways of breaking things down for different aspects of your code too. And it unfortunately it comes with experience. You can start to understand which parts of code is the best to use and which sections, what's the best function or best type of function to use for a specific part of your code. Um, but for me, it's come with experience. I went to school for programming. Sure, I knew a lot coming out of there, but it doesn't really prepare you for specific scenarios that you're going to be in and what's the best implementation of your code to use. That being said, you can once again leverage experienced people to kind of get an idea of what's the correct thing and the correct way of doing this, because just like in process builders and all of the other things, there is that hierarchy of, well, we want to use a standard trigger. Is this your first trigger? Sure it is. Then let's just write a little handler for that and we'll be fine. Is this your 50th trigger? Well, all those little handlers won't really make sense anymore. We're probably going to need something like a trigger framework to manage all the different calls out and the recursive nature of that specific trigger. So, and that's just one specific piece. In it of itself, there is a lot more detail and fine tuning that you can do to make sure the org is running the most efficient that it can. Because at the end of the day, you don't want your code, when you save a record, it's already slow. People are still harping about Lightning being slow on a record saved by default. So when you save your actual record, you don't want your triggers taking additional time for the users, because that's time in general. That's people's time, and it makes the system not as user friendly. And then people don't want to use the system. And the biggest harp that we get is, you want to make it fast, efficient, and make sure that you're uh, getting all the information accurately for the user in a timely fashion.
Right. So I think that puts it a really good segue to the final question then, right? Let's fast forward a couple of months. We have not paid attention to any of this advice, and we jump into an org that is insanely convoluted, and we have the task of streamlining this. Or maybe let's just go back to that initial example, right? A 2013 org. We just joined a company that had this org from 2013, super convoluted. Um, what are some of the things for people that may be already in that situation that they can do or they should be careful of when trying to streamline?
I think the biggest thing is just taking a step back, stop trying to rip things out or change things, and understand what's really going on. There's one piece of that understanding, which is understand what the business wants. Because just because the business wants something doesn't mean that's the way that it's written in code or configuration or anything like that. So write down all of your business logic. Figure out what needs to happen inside of the org as the business needs it. If you need an opportunity to automatically get created after the original opportunity is closed won, so creating a renewal, sure, that's good on paper. Let's write it down and keep it as a requirement. On the other hand of that, figure out what's actually going on in the code or configuration. Write down all of your processes and see what they're actually doing or updating. because chances are, especially in legacy orgs, what you have in the code and in the automation may differ from what's actually inside, or what it relates to on the business logic sense. Because this was written maybe years ago by 6 different people as we've gone along through the process, and there may be dormant code, there may be things that are getting updated that don't make any sense anymore. So it's really good to just lay them out and then come together with whoever you need to kind of mesh and figure out where you need to go from there. And after you get that plan, that's when you start ripping things out and changing things around to see what's the best approach for it.
Cool. Very exciting things. I mean, there's a lot of interesting conversations that we can take this from. I want to take it back just to one point that you mentioned a little bit earlier. I had a chance to talk to Josh LeQuire from the Coterie. Great guy. We had a chat. It's on the channel here about technical debt. And you mentioned something that we talked about, and it was one of the biggest takeaways for me, which is, if you cannot, if only a single person understands, then you're probably going to have an issue, right? And that's a big way to collect technical debt, especially in smaller organizations where you'll have one person responsible. If that person leaves and there's no documentation, you're really in a tough challenge, regardless of whether it's declarative or whether it's code. I mean, we just talked about it, in our 20 minutes here. There's tons of ways to potentially put yourself in a tough situation. Are there any tools that you have come across, or anything that you may want to recommend for organizations that are working with single individuals that to help that they should look into, right? For easy documentation or easy ways to help and digest the situation that you could put yourself in.
Yeah. So for me, we do get asked this question a lot, and it's kind of hard to pinpoint it because a lot of organizations have different ways of doing their note taking and walking through their org. If it was me, I'd make videos for everything, but that's not everybody wants to be on camera like that or talk about their org. But on the other hand, I'd say the easy ones are use things like flow charting tools like Lucid Charts to map out your high level processes and what should happen. And then on the other side, there's things like Confluence, which can really help create that wiki or that booklet of what's going on inside of your org. But I know people that just have a shared Google Drive document that goes over a lot of their processes, or they'll even have things like OneNote that help go over their individual processes. So it's hard to kind of pinpoint the a one-stop shop, and maybe that's something I need to do some research on myself. But I think you need to find what works good with your organization. Definitely document out all of the processes that are going on in your org the best you can, so that you can hand it to somebody else and make sure that they understand it. Because if you're gone, if you need to be out for, you want to take a month vacation and something breaks, you don't want to be the only person that they call.
Yeah, that's true. Listen, we can certainly talk a lot more about clicks versus code. I think there's tons of other conversations and other talking points. Anything that you want to close with, Warren?
So the biggest thing is there's a lot of different tools out there in Salesforce. You have workflow rules, automations, process builders, code, and there's a whole myriad of things inside of there. The biggest thing for me is to be well-rounded as an individual. Try to understand all of them. Even if you don't want to go down the code route, understand what governor limits are, understand some of the concepts of Apex programming, so that you can make yourself more valuable and you can go into any org and start to understand it, even if it's a little bit convoluted. So that will help build up your organization and bring you to the huge harmony that we talked about using clicks and code together. You'll know all the different functionalities and features that you can use. So I would say become well-rounded, understand all the aspects of Salesforce. It is huge. It is complicated, but over time, you can definitely learn the different pieces that you need to learn to understand and be amazing. An awesome admin, a development wizard, a flow master, all of that stuff.
That's true. Listen, Warren, I want to give you a big shout out for coming in. These are some amazing insights. For anyone who doesn't follow this man on YouTube and on social media, please do. This is Walters954. There's amazing content that he puts out all the time. Warren, really big pleasure having you here. And I think a good way to conclude this, which is regardless whether it's with clicks or code, as Uncle Ben used to say, with great power comes great responsibility. So I hope everyone keeps Salesforcing responsibly and build some amazing solutions out there. So guys, thank you very much. Thank you, Warren, and we'll see you on the next one. Goodbye. And done.
Sweet.